Sorry, I had to stop the video here. It's not fair enough. Shooting that sequence that you just seen was not easy at all. This DJI OM5 gimbal is not an easy gimbal to use. In my opinion, this gimbal is only good for anyone who shoots vertical video and uses the selfie camera at the front, the TikToker type of crowd. But if you are a content creator who shoots with the rear back lenses, which happen to be the better lenses by a long mile, this is not a gimbal for you. I don't know what you might have read online or what reviews you watched on YouTube. This is not a great gimbal. Hell, this is not even a good gimbal. I shouldn't say on camera what I really think about this gimbal. But stay tuned and I'll show you why. When you look at the OM5, who do you think DJI designed it for? Who do you really think they're targeting with this selfie stick, gimmick, extension, whatever you want to call it? If you check DJI's page for the OM5, you can clearly see who the intended target audience is. They should already give you an indication as to whether this is a gimbal for you or not. Not only that, but look what happens when you boot this thing up, okay? Defaults to the vertical mode. Why? Because this gimbal is designed and targeted to people who use vertical filming and also the selfie camera. So who needs this selfie stick? Exactly, you guessed it right. Anyone who creates content using the front-facing selfie lens. But I get the feeling that if you're watching this video, you probably don't fall into that category. So, what is good about this gimbal then? Well, it's lightweight, I'll give you that. You can easily fit it in your pocket. It's much smaller than the previous version, the OM4. The clamping mechanism is a nice feature. It makes it easy to balance and pop the phone on and off. And the MIMO app is really well designed, intuitive, still far from perfect. And if you're on Android, you're limited to just 30 frames per second, which in my opinion renders the whole thing useless. On the other hand, if you're an iPhone, you have no issues with frame rates, so I guess this could well be a turn off for any Android users. Unless you use a third-party app like Filmy Pro, and given the fact that you can now switch modes on the gimbal itself, it's probably the best and only option you have. That is if you want to shoot at 24 or 60 frames per second and you are on Android. The time-lapse feature is really nice, but it's nothing different than what most of the gimbals offer these days. And that's it really. Honestly, this is as good as you're gonna hear it. Because this gimbal is not something that you would consider if you're interested in getting even just half decent results. Where do I start? I many times wonder if most people reviewing this gimbal or any of the DJI OM gimbals for that matter have actually ever used them for anything than holding it to camera while doing the review. Because anyone who uses this gimbal and knows how even half a decent gimbal should operate cannot in all fairness recommend this OM5. Why? Look, the most basic move you should be able to do with a gimbal is to go up and down without any restrictions in movement whatsoever. That is what a normal camera gimbal does, as you can see here. You can go from the ground up without any problem. But not with the OM5, no. This is literally impossible. I have never understood why gimbal manufacturers, and this is not just DJI, have settled for this design with a bracket right behind the phone. It makes it impossible to operate the gimbal the right way, unless the gimbal is intended to be used with the selfie camera, and in that case then, it does make sense. But if you want to use the gimbal with the rear lenses and operate it the way a normal gimbal should be, forget it. You cannot physically do it. And this is the most basic gimbal move that you can do. If you want to do this type of move, you need to turn the gimbal sideways and twist your wrist as you move up in a weird and unnatural way. And honestly, that's not how you operate the gimbal. The whole thing of going sideways is a joke, really. Come on. Imagine now that you want to mount the gimbal on a pole or monopod to get G-bomb type of shots or ultra low angles. Well, that's just not gonna happen. The whole design thing is completely backwards. Twisting your wrist to get the right movement to go from low angle to normal height, it's really difficult and it requires a lot of practice because it's just not a natural move that you can easily do, and getting the right motion will need a lot of takes. One thing I give credit to DJI is that they have tried to solve a really irritating issue with the OM4. If you were using the gimbal in a slight angle and you double tap the back button, it will reset it back to the default position, which was always tilted. This drove me mad, and at least I can say that now they sort of solved it. Sometimes it does keep the camera at the right angle, other times it doesn't, totally randomly, but at least it's an improvement from the OM4. Saying that, you still have a very narrow tilting range, so even though you are better off than with the OM4, you still have to deal with the issue of the gimbal going off tilt or balance when you try even the smallest move up or down. This lack of tilting range is very frustrating, especially when you try to do any creative shots, because getting it to the right angle to, let's say, going from the ground up, sometimes out of nowhere the phone goes crazy and starts spinning on the way up. What? This is because when you angle the gimbal sideways, it's so easy for it to go in low-mo, which means that it spins the mobile upside down. And from this position going up, well, it spins again. It's already bad enough to get the whole sideways motion right, and on top of that you have to worry about something like this. I hardly see anybody talking about these issues when reviewing this gimbal, and these are problems that you will experience. It's not if or maybe, no, you will experience them. Listen to what happens when you turn this gimbal on, okay? Can you hear the background noise? This is the sound of the motors inside, and it's always there. Can you imagine how much worse it would get when you add a filter and a lens on top? Honestly, you tilt, it's there. You pan, it's there. You touch the phone to browse, it's there. You put it on a standby, the sound is there. I don't hear a single person talking about this or even raising this issue. Absolute jokers. Honestly, this is really loud. And I bet that a lot of people, if not most people, at some point, if not always, will use this gimbal and record sound using the phone's microphone. We all know that the onboard mics on phones are absolute crap, and yes, you should always try and record sound using the external microphone, but let's be honest here. There are so many instances where you would use a gimbal and record sound directly into the phone itself. This is one that really shocked me because it means that any onboard audio will have this noise baked in, and there is nothing you can do about it. This will catch a lot of people off guard. As if you didn't have enough to worry about. But hold on, because there is more. The selfie stick is the one element in this gimbal that baffles me. Unless you accept and understand that this gimbal is designed for people who uses selfie sticks, the selfie lens, and primarily uses vertical video. You might be excited at the possibility of having that extra length for creative shots, but because this gimbal has such a tiny tilting range, the moment you do any movement, either up or down, the whole thing goes out of whack and your framing goes off. This is obviously, unless you use the front-facing camera, and in that sense, the selfie stick makes perfect sense for vloggers who don't know or don't care much about the fact that the selfie lens quality is abysmal when you compare it to the main wide lens at the back of the phone. I totally dig the fact that it's easy and simple to have a built-in extension rod that you can easily extend out and get a good talking to camera vlogging setup. What I have an issue with is that even the 23mm focal length selfie lens on the extended pole, it's still not quite wide enough. If you want a genuine wide, you need to use the rear wide or ultra wide. To do that, you need to mount the phone facing back, and there is no way of monitoring what the frame is. What would have been a really useful feature is a way to flip the gimbal around rather than just using the selfie stick. That way you'd use the selfie stick with the real lenses. That would be quite good. Even better, out of the gimbal itself, you get a small 1 or 2 inch LCD screen, like the Pocket 2's tiny LCD screens, so you can actually monitor the real lenses when using the selfie stick. I know it's probably really hard to do and it would probably mean a higher price tag, but that in my opinion would make the selfie stick really worth it. And okay, yes, you now can do low angle quite comfortably where you record at floor level, but if you then want to do a shot going up from ground level, you will have to bring the gimbal up upside down holding the selfie stick. That is just not the right way to use or operate the gimbal. I think the concept behind the magnetic mount or clamp is brilliant. It's really easy to use and makes balancing the phone fairly easy. But what happens if you lose it, drop it or misplace it? And that's something that can easily happen, and because you only get one mount, if you lose it, you're pretty much stuck. You can't use this gimbal, period. There is absolutely no way of mounting this phone. It's as simple as that. And trust me, losing, forgetting or misplacing things, especially this small, happens more often than you think. I love the concept, but what they should have done is provide a magnet option or adapter that you can fix on the mount itself permanently and for it to be MagSafe. And given the fact that they alienate Android users by providing an app that they can't really use, they may as well go all in with iPhone, because that is likely to be the phone that most people will be using with this gimbal. It would make things so much easier. You still don't get any adjustments on the stiffness of the motors, which I find incredible because they expect people to use heavy phones like the 12 Pro Max or like the new iPhone 13 Pro or Pro Max. Look, it's not the same to use the gimbal with a phone on its own than attaching lenses or filters. The more weight you put, the more adjustments you need to do to the motors to run well. And this is just the laws of physics, and it should be a no-brainer. The OM5 gives you adjustments for the control joystick, but nothing on the actual motors. And let me tell you, the slow setting on the jog wheel is not really slow. It's virtually impossible to do a slow panel tilt. The joystick is just way too aggressive. I don't understand why they can't implement a setting to adjust the ease in and ease out, so when you start the movement or end it, it does it really slow and smoothly. For some, this may not be a big thing, but if you're gonna be investing your money on a gimbal expecting to create really smooth shots, you're gonna get very disappointed. Now, like everything in life, can you work around this and create amazing looking shots? Of course you can. Like everything in life, there will be people who will swear by the OM5 like it's the best gimbal out there. Go figure, honestly. The MIMO app is probably the best thing this gimbal has going. It's very well implemented and it's quite intuitive. I think DJI has done a good job here. That is, as long as your phone is an iPhone. If you use an Android phone, well, you still can't shoot on any other resolution other than 4K at 30 frames per second. And that to me, if I was on an Android, would be an instant turn off. Even better, you get no option, whether on an iPhone or an Android, to shoot with a flat color space. You get the color space that the MIMO app offers, and that's that. Take it or leave it. Given the fact that pretty much any decent third-party app offers flat color space these days, I think it's baffling to say the least that DJI doesn't offer this with OM5. Back to what I said earlier, probably because the TikTok generation, who are the people I think this gimbal is designed for, don't care about color spaces or things like that. They just want to press a button and off you go. Now this is something that they've got right. In previous models, you had to change the gimbal modes through the MIMO app, but now you can do it through the buttons on the gimbal itself. You gotta give DJI credit for that, but, and there is always a but. Although you do now get support for 10-bit HDR within the MIMO app itself, you have no histogram or false color to make sure that you're exposing correctly. Come on, DJI, seriously? Even the tiny Pocket 2 has at least a histogram. Surely this can't be that difficult to implement, is it? This is why I think that other than for time lapses, you're most likely gonna be using this gimbal with a third-party app like Filming Pro, because they give you much more control and visual references than the MIMO app. It's a shame because I do like the MIMO app, but ultimately it's still lacking some very basic features. Now, in terms of slow motion, you do get the option to record at 240 frames per second, but in 1080p, not 4K. And this is worth keeping in mind. It looks okay, but you can see that it's way softer than if you were to film at 4K 60 frames per second. I keep saying the same with all the DJI products that use the MIMO app and offer it slow-mo. I think slow-mo is for outdoors only and for close-ups, and not for wide shots. And how about the tracking, you might ask? Well, it's definitely improved from the OM4, but the issue I have with all these gimbals and the tracking they do is that they always keep the subject in the middle of the frame. And you always end up with this massive headroom over your head, and it just doesn't look natural. Personally, I hate it when they do that. Why can't they not give a way to adjust the headroom in a shot? I've never quite understood the logic behind it, and it can't be that difficult, can it? You do get some gimmicky features thrown in, like the face adjustments, beauty, whatever they call it. Again, totally geared for the vertical TikToker or Instagram user. I find it completely useless, and in fact, I honestly have a real issue with this. Because with so many young kids growing up with stress and all sorts of mental health disorders because of social media pressures on the way they look, and with this huge media backlash in the fashion industry about image retouching and how fake retouch images are seriously affecting young boys and girls growing up, I actually find this feature an insult, and it would be the first thing I would suggest DJI to remove. But once again, it's clear how this gimbal is targeted to. Other gimmicky features like the dynamic zoom or stories are things that I honestly can't see many people using. I'd rather DJI use the engineers' time in developing the gimbal and the MIMO app better, rather than wasting time on features that are pretty much pointless. I mean, when was the last time you ever saw in a shot, or used for that matter, the dynamic zoom? Come on! So who is this gimbal for? Well, clearly for anyone shooting vertical, Instagrammers and TikTokers, that type of crowd. If you plan to use this gimbal for creative standard horizontal filming, like films, corporate filming, YouTube filming and that sort of thing, this gimbal is, in my humble opinion, and being polite, inadequate. I have affiliate links below for the gear that I use, but I don't believe in this gimbal, so I'm not providing a single link to it. As a matter of fact, I'd actually be rather upset if I ever make a dime out of anyone buying this gimbal, because I honestly believe that they'd be wasting their money. It would also be rather hypocritical of me after such a glowing review. Please don't buy this gimbal, do yourself a favor. I do have a video appearing about here, but another gimbal in the same price range that at least offers something unique and definitely useful. And with that being said, smash that like button if you find this video helpful, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next video.